She invited her husband's mistress to dinner, but what happened at the table left everyone frozen. The house felt too quiet for a Thursday evening. The kind of quiet that makes you hear things you normally ignore. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, the faint rustle of the curtains when the air conditioning kicked in. Tiana stood in her Atlanta kitchen just before sunset, her hands still and her breathing slow, as if her body was trying to prepare her for something her heart hadn't caught up to yet. A single dinner plate sat on the counter. Her plate. But the table told the truth she hadn't spoken out loud. She had set 3 places. Not 2, not 1, 3. A choice that didn't match the calm on her face. A choice that revealed everything she hadn't said. Her thumb hovered over a message thread she was never meant to see. The late-night text from the woman who had been eating from her marriage in ways she never imagined. "Did you get home safe? I miss you." That line hadn't just hurt. It had rearranged something inside her. It was the bruise she couldn't cover, the truth she could no longer pretend wasn't there. She tried to breathe, but a memory knocked into her unexpectedly, the kind that chooses you, not the other way around. Richard standing in this same kitchen 2 years earlier, laughing as he tried to help her cook, wiping sauce off her arm with a smile that used to feel safe. "I want us to always tell the truth," he'd said. "Even when it's hard." That sentence struck her like cold water now. Not because it was broken, but because she realized she had been carrying the truth alone. She rested a hand on the back of the dining chair, steadying herself, not out of weakness, but out of acceptance. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't pacing. Her calm wasn't denial. It was clarity. This dinner wasn't revenge. It was revelation. Outside, a sound cut through the silence. A car door closing. A moment later, a second door closed. 2 different tones. 2 different rhythms. 2 sets of footsteps approached the house, both arriving sooner than they were supposed to. Her pulse didn't race. Her hands didn't shake. Instead, she whispered to herself, almost like a reminder, "Tonight, nobody gets to hide." She wasn't threatening. She wasn't breaking. She was done carrying a story that didn't belong to her alone. If you've ever had to face a truth you didn't ask for, go ahead and like this story so it can reach someone who might need the strength sitting in this moment. Welcome to Mr. Graham Stories, where real stories meet real-life lessons. Every video is crafted to inspire, challenge, and stay with you long after it ends. If you believe in growth, second chances, and meaningful storytelling, you're home. Subscribe, like the video, and tell us the time and where you're watching from. Tiana didn't move right away. She stayed in the kitchen doorway, watching the front of the house the way someone watches a storm forming through a window. Not afraid, just aware it's finally here. The last rays of sunlight slipped across the floorboards, stretching toward the dining table where she'd set those 3 plates with quiet precision. The footsteps outside grew clearer, one lighter, one heavier, and for the first time since she made this plan, she noticed how her body reacted. Not tension, not panic, just a steady readiness, as if her heart had finally caught up to the truth she'd been wrestling with alone. Atlanta, the south side she grew up in, the city that taught her backbone, had shaped her for moments like this. Atlanta. Women from her neighborhood didn't crumble under pressure. They tightened their posture, lifted their chin, and faced what needed facing. She wiped her palms once on her jeans, almost out of habit. She wasn't rehearsing. She wasn't scripting anything. Whatever happened next would come from a place she had learned to trust, her own clarity. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A short vibration, one notification, not from Richard, not from the woman joining him, just a reminder from her calendar, dinner at 7 p.m. The irony made her breathe out a short, humorless laugh. A reminder for a dinner she'd turned into something entirely different. Not chaotic, not dramatic, just honest. A space where truth wouldn't have a single corner to hide in. The doorknob rattled, gently at first. Richard always entered the house quietly, like he didn't want to disturb anything. It used to be something she appreciated. Now it felt like another part of him she couldn't quite read anymore. He stepped inside, calling her name in a tone that felt too normal for the night ahead. "Tiana, I'm home." She didn't answer. She let the silence greet him instead. The second pair of footsteps followed, softer, hesitant, unsure. The mistress didn't say a word. Maybe she wasn't supposed to be here yet. Maybe she thought this was a mistake. Maybe she had no idea this invitation wasn't born from emotion, but from truth. Tiana walked toward the dining room, her pace even, her breath steady. The house lights glowed warm against the walls. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical. A normal evening in a normal home, except for one uncomfortable truth. Nothing about this night was normal. She reached the dining table and touched the back of the chair at the head. It grounded her, reminded her who she was before any of this happened. A woman raised on honesty, shaped by community, strengthened by years of choosing peace even when life made it hard. She heard Richard's steps pause, that brief moment when a person senses that something is off before their mind understands why. Tayana kept her eyes on the table and whispered again, softer this time, almost like a prayer to herself. Tonight, we put everything on this table. Everything. Not rage, not confrontation, just truth. And truth had never been something she feared. She took one breath, deep, steady, deliberate, and walked toward the moment that would change her marriage forever. Richard stepped further into the house, confusion tugging at his voice as he looked around. He expected the soft greeting he was used to, the familiar warmth Tayana always offered even on hard days. But the silence hanging in the living room felt heavier than the air outside. He sensed it, the shift, the distance, even before he saw her. Tayana, he called again, quieter now. She emerged from the dining room, not rushing, not avoiding him, moving with a calm that made the walls feel tighter around them. She wasn't defensive or angry. She wasn't performing anything. Her expression was steady, clear, the kind of calm people don't reach unless they've already made a decision inside themselves. When Richard finally noticed the table behind her, his breath caught. 3 plates, 3 glasses, 3 neatly folded napkins. His eyes blinked like he was trying to force the scene to rearrange into something that made sense. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. A few steps behind him, the mistress hovered near the doorway, unsure if she should step inside or disappear. She looked at the floor, at her hands, at anything except the woman she had been avoiding in every possible way. Tayana didn't look at her. Not yet. Instead, she focused on Richard, the man who once stood in this same room promising honesty even when it felt uncomfortable. His shoulders lowered slightly the second he realized what those 3 plates meant. She didn't have to accuse him. The truth was already sitting between them. Her voice held that quiet firmness, the kind that doesn't need to rise to be heard. "Go ahead and come in," she said. "Both of you." The mistress flinched at the invitation, then slowly stepped forward, keeping her eyes down as if the floor might save her. Richard finally found his voice. "Tayana, what is this?" She didn't step toward him. She didn't step back. She simply turned her head, just enough for him to see the steady look in her eyes. "You've been eating in secret," she said softly. "So tonight you'll eat here, where I can see the truth for myself." It wasn't sharp. It wasn't cruel. It was honest, painfully, undeniably honest. Richard froze, the weight of his choices landing on him in real time. The mistress stood behind him like a shadow that no longer had anywhere to hide. The air in the house changed, not because voices were raised, but because truth had finally walked into the room and taken its seat. Tayana pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down with a calm that shook the entire moment. "If you've ever faced something you didn't want but couldn't avoid," she said quietly to herself, "the kind of line that comes from lived experience, not performance. Like this story, so it reaches someone who might need it." Outside, the sky darkened, and the last light slipped away from the room. Inside, everything that had been hidden was now sitting in plain sight. And nothing would be the same after tonight. The first time Tayana saw Richard, she wasn't looking for anything. Not a connection, not a spark, not even a moment worth remembering. She had flown into Dallas early that morning for a leadership seminar her job insisted she attend. The kind of event where people wore perfectly pressed clothes, walked with purpose, and tried to network even when they looked exhausted. Dallas was warmer than she expected. The airport air felt heavy, not from heat but from the energy of people moving fast, trying to get somewhere. By the time she reached the seminar hall downtown, she felt the kind of tired that made her crave a quiet corner and a cup of tea. But instead she walked into a ballroom filled with round tables, bright screens, and chairs arranged in patterns that didn't make sense until you sat down. Tayana found a seat near the middle, not the front, not the back. The safe zone. She pulled out her notebook, placed her pen on top, and exhaled slowly, as if preparing herself for a long day of listening. That's when he walked in. Richard didn't stand out because of his clothes or his posture. He stood out because of the way he scanned the room like someone who'd misread the map and was trying to pretend he didn't. His suit was tailored, his expression controlled, but his eyes were restless. The eyes of a man who looked like he was expected to be confident, but confidence wasn't quite fitting him right that day. He took a seat 2 chairs away from her, just close enough that she noticed when he accidentally dropped his pen. It rolled toward her, tapping softly against her shoe. She picked it up and handed it back without ceremony. "Here," she said, simple and neutral. "Thank you," he replied, and his voice had that calm tone people from old money families often carried, a tone shaped by private schools and dinner tables where politeness mattered more than truth. For a moment, neither of them looked at each other fully. Just small glances, the kind people exchange when they're aware of someone without wanting to make it obvious. The seminar began with introductions, a few icebreakers, and a speaker who talked about leadership like it was something you could buy in a box. Teyana tried to pay attention, but her mind drifted. She wasn't lonely, not exactly, but she was in that stage of life where people around her started asking questions, sometimes gently, sometimes with pressure. "When are you settling down?" "You're getting older, sweetie. Don't wait too long. You're too picky. Maybe try someone different." She wasn't looking for different. She was looking for real. Steadiness. Peace. Conversation that didn't feel like a tug of war. Richard, meanwhile, sat with perfect posture, but his knee bounced under the table. She noticed it without meaning to. That small movement told her more about him than anything he'd said so far, which was nothing at all. People who were truly secure didn't bounce their knees like that. People who felt the pressure of expectations did. During the first break, people scattered toward the coffee station. Teyana stayed seated, scrolling through her phone. Richard didn't move either, and for a moment, it was only the two of them at the table. He broke the silence first. "Do you come to these things often?" he asked, like he was trying to sound casual but wasn't sure how. She looked up. "No, my job sent me. You?" "Same." He smiled a little. "Feels like everyone here already knows the right answer to every question." She shrugged, probably rehearsed it in the mirror. He chuckled, a soft, honest laugh, and something about that sound felt familiar. Not intimate, not romantic, just human. Two people recognizing a shared discomfort. Then came another glance, still awkward, still quick, but this time something shifted. Not sparks, not attraction, just recognition. The quiet kind that makes you feel seen without knowing why. A second workshop began, this one requiring group discussion. Their table ended up working together, and with each idea shared, Teyana learned pieces of him. He was articulate, but not in a showy way. He listened more than he spoke. He tried not to dominate the conversation, even though he easily could have. She appreciated that. Richard learned pieces of her too. She spoke with confidence that didn't need volume. She made eye contact that felt sincere instead of intimidating. She carried herself like someone raised in a community that valued honest talk and the ability to stand firm. At one point, their hands reached for the same printed worksheet, and both paused. He pulled his hand back quickly. "Sorry," he said. "It's fine," she replied, but a small smile tugged at her lips. The cultural contrast between them wasn't obvious yet, not fully, but little hints showed. Teyana referenced her co-workers in Atlanta, her church community, her upbringing in a neighborhood where people checked on you without being asked. Richard referenced winters in New England, holiday parties where everyone spoke in measured tones, family traditions that revolved around expectations instead of connection. Two different worlds, two different rhythms, but both carried a kind of loneliness, his shaped by pressure, hers shaped by longing for emotional steadiness. In the afternoon, the seminar facilitator had everyone pair up for a short exercise. Teyana and Richard ended up together by coincidence or convenience, maybe both. They answered questions about leadership, communication, conflict resolution, but the real conversation happened between the lines. "You're good at listening," he said quietly. "Comes from growing up around women who talked a lot," she replied, smiling slightly. He laughed again, softer this time, and for a brief moment, the space between them felt less like two strangers and more like two people who understood isolation in different flavors. When the final session ended, people grabbed their bags and hurried toward the exits. Teyana gathered her notebook and prepared to leave. She didn't expect anything, not a follow-up, not a spark, not a chance encounter. But before she reached the aisle, Richard stepped beside her. "Safe flight back?" he asked. She looked at him, puzzled by the unexpected question. "Yeah, you. Driving back to my hotel." He hesitated, then added, "It was nice working with you today." She nodded. "You too." No exchange of numbers, no romantic undertone. Just two adults acknowledging a moment that felt strangely meaningful without knowing why. As she walked out into the warm Dallas evening, Tayana didn't look back. But she felt something, a shift, a tiny pull, nothing loud. Just two lives brushing against each other at the right moment, before either of them understood what it meant. The emotional truth was simple. Two people who weren't looking for love recognized something familiar in each other's loneliness. And that quiet recognition would become the starting point for everything that followed. The joy, the connection, the cracks, the silence, the dinner that would one day freeze a room. The weeks after the Dallas seminar passed quietly for Tayana. She returned to her routines in Atlanta, working, visiting her mother on Sundays, helping her niece with homework, cooking simple meals for herself in the evenings. Life felt familiar again. Predictable, steady, but every now and then, usually when she wasn't thinking about anything in particular, her mind drifted back to that moment in Dallas. The awkward pen drop, the restless knee movement, the soft laugh Richard let out when she joked about people rehearsing their answers in the mirror. She didn't think of him romantically. It was more like remembering a passerby who made an ordinary day feel slightly less heavy. It wasn't enough to call a spark, just a memory she didn't mind having. So when her phone buzzed 2 weeks later with an unfamiliar number and a simple message, "Hey, this is Richard from the seminar. I hope it's okay that I reached out." She stared at the screen longer than she expected to. She reread his name twice, not because she was surprised, but because something about it felt gentle, not intrusive, not assuming, just a small check-in from someone who had shared a table with her for a few hours. She replied, "Hi. It's fine. Hope you're doing well." Nothing flirty, nothing leading, just human. He wrote back minutes later, "Doing all right. I keep thinking about that comment you made, about people rehearsing in the mirror. You were right. I could tell half that room woke up practicing their lines." She laughed, a real laugh this time, alone in her kitchen. One message turned into two. Two turned into a short conversation, and by the end of the night, they were talking about everything except the seminar, where she grew up, his small-town Massachusetts upbringing, her dream of finding a work-life balance one day, his struggle with his family's constant expectations, her love for old-school R&B, his confession that he'd been listening to some since Dallas, trying to understand why people loved it so much. It wasn't flirting, not yet. It was two people finding a rhythm. Over the next few weeks, their exchanges became common. A call after dinner, a message during lunch, a question that led to another question, and a full conversation that stretched until midnight without either of them realizing how much time had passed. Richard had a way of listening that made her feel unhurried. When she talked about challenges at work, he didn't try to fix anything. He asked questions. He offered perspective. He took her thoughts seriously, even when she wasn't sure she was expressing them well. Tayana had a way of grounding him. When he rambled about the pressure of family expectations, the subtle reminders from his parents about careers and status, the weight of being the stable one, the unspoken assumption that he would marry someone from the same background, she didn't judge him. She didn't dismiss him. She simply said, "You don't owe anybody a version of yourself that doesn't feel real." That sentence stayed with him for days. One Friday night he called while driving back to his hotel from a work meeting. She answered, surprised. "Didn't expect to hear from you this late," she said. "Sorry," he replied. "I just didn't feel like being alone with my thoughts tonight." His honesty wasn't dramatic. It was simple, plain, true. And in that moment, Tayana recognized something she understood well, loneliness wrapped in responsibility. They talked until he pulled into the hotel parking lot. He didn't rush to hang up. She didn't remind him of the time. It felt natural, as if their conversations had been part of her life much longer than a few weeks. The following month, they started taking long drives whenever Richard visited Atlanta for work, something his job required more often than she would have expected. He'd text her, "Got some free time tomorrow. Want to grab coffee or something?" She'd reply, "Depends. Will there be snacks?" He'd laugh and show up with something sweet from a bakery he found online. Their drives weren't loud or energetic. They were calm, music playing low, windows cracked just enough to feel the breeze, the city rolling by as if it approved of whatever was forming between them. Sometimes they talked deeply. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. Both felt comfortable. One evening, during a drive through a quiet stretch of road outside the city, he asked her, "Did you always know what you wanted out of life?" She shook her head. "I still don't. I know what I don't want. Chaos, confusion, someone who disappears instead of talking. I want peace." Partnership. Not perfection, just someone who tries. He nodded slowly, his fingers tapping the steering wheel. I've never said this out loud, but I feel like I spend more time trying to be who people expect me to be than who I actually am. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth in that confession. A man raised with everything except emotional freedom. You ever get tired of that? She asked. All the time, he said quietly. It wasn't a romantic moment. It was a human one. Their connection built itself in layers, not through grand gestures, but through small truths shared in safe spaces. He brought steadiness. She brought honesty. They met each other in the middle. But outside their conversations, the world did what the world does. When they went out in public, she noticed the looks, the sideways glances, the quiet judgment. A black woman and a white man weren't unheard of, but people still had unspoken opinions. Richard noticed too. The tight smiles from strangers, the raised brows, the subtle reactions from his family when he mentioned her once, in passing. So, she's from Atlanta? His mother had asked carefully. And she works in what field? Tayana didn't know the details then, but she felt the pressure around him whenever her name came up. Not rejection, just discomfort. A tension that lived between tradition and choice. Still, their connection deepened. Phone calls turned into shared playlists. Shared playlists turned into inside jokes. Inside jokes turned into a gentle, mutual awareness. They were slowly choosing each other. It didn't flare up suddenly. It warmed gradually, like a slow ember building heat. One night, after a long talk about his family and her childhood, there was a pause on the line. Not awkward, just full. Richard spoke first. I don't know what this is yet, he said, but I know I look forward to talking to you more than I expected. Tayana exhaled softly. Yeah, me too. Not sparks, not fireworks. Just a steady flame, something real, something slow, something earned. Love wasn't rushing. It was growing, and neither of them knew it yet, but this slow-build connection would become the foundation of everything. The happiness, the pressure, the silence, and the night years later, when 3 plates sat on a table waiting for the truth. Their wedding day didn't look like the ones you see in magazines or those perfect videos couples post online. It wasn't designed to impress anybody. It wasn't extravagant or dripping in decorations. It was simply the day 2 people chose each other, with all their differences, all their histories, all the quiet hopes they carried separately for years. Tayana woke up early that morning in her mother's house on the south side of Atlanta. The house smelled like coffee and hair products, the same comforting scent she'd grown up with before school days and church Sundays. Her mother insisted on doing her hair, even though Tayana could have gone to a stylist. There was something grounding about sitting between her mother's hands again, something sacred about it. You ready for this? Her mother asked, part teasing, part serious. Tayana smiled. I am. You sure? Marriage ain't for the faint-hearted. I know, she replied, but I feel calm with him. Her mother nodded, the kind of nod shaped by years of watching life unfold. Calm is good, makes the storms easier to manage. Meanwhile, Richard got dressed in a modest hotel room near downtown. He wasn't surrounded by groomsmen or a crowd of friends. His family had flown in, though, and even in that small space, he felt the weight of their presence. His mother insisted he wear a tie that matched the color palette she assumed Tayana would choose. She has warm taste, his mother said gently. Richard corrected her softly. Tayana chose whatever she felt was right. She doesn't follow palettes. His mother blinked, a little thrown by the correction, but said nothing else. His father patted his shoulder, offering a stiff smile. Proud of you, son. Richard appreciated the sentiment, but there was always that unspoken line underneath, the expectation that he would keep things stable, polished, acceptable. He pushed the thought aside. Today was not about expectation. It was about commitment. The ceremony took place in a small community garden behind a local event hall. It wasn't extravagant. It was warm, quiet, and filled with natural beauty. White chairs lined up in rows, simple floral arrangements, nothing excessive, just enough. Richard stood at the front, tugging at his sleeves, doing his best not to look nervous. But when Tayana stepped out, wearing a dress that fit her body and spirit, walking slowly beside her mother, his breath caught, not in a dramatic way, in a way that felt like something inside him had clicked into place. She didn't glow. She didn't sparkle. She settled into the moment, and for him, that was everything. When she reached him, their eyes held for a long second, saying all the things words hadn't managed to yet. shared loneliness, shared safety, shared hope. The officiant kept it simple. Vows that didn't sound memorized. Promises that didn't sound like performances. Hands held tightly, maybe tighter than necessary. Their families watched with mixed emotions. Tiana's side was loud beforehand, teasing, excited, trying to make her laugh. Richard's side was politely supportive, softer, still getting used to everything that came with loving someone outside their familiar circles. The blend wasn't seamless, but it was honest. After the ceremony, they held a small reception. No huge dance floor, no towering cake, no illusion of perfection. Just people eating, talking, and stepping outside their comfort zones long enough to celebrate two people who found each other in a Dallas conference room. At one point, Richard's mother walked up to Tiana. "You look beautiful," she said with a genuine smile, though it still carried a hint of restraint. "Thank you," Tiana replied warmly. "I'm glad you both came. It means a lot." And it did. Even if they didn't fully understand her, they tried. Later, as things calmed down, Tiana stood beside Richard under the garden lights, the warm glow settling on both of them. He leaned in a bit, his voice low. "Can you believe we're married?" he asked. She smiled up at him. "Feels right." It did feel right. Not perfect, not magical, just right. That night, when they returned to their first shared apartment, they walked through the door hand in hand, stepping into a new chapter that felt like a beginning rather than an ending of their individuality. Marriage came with beauty, but also with small challenges. Tiana learned that Richard loaded the dishwasher like he was solving a puzzle he cared too much about. Richard learned that Tiana had a habit of humming when she was deep in thought. They learned how to share space, share emotions, share silence. Some nights they lay on the couch watching shows she chose because he wanted to learn her tastes. Other nights, he introduced her to documentaries she pretended to enjoy but secretly found boring, not because they were bad, but because she'd rather hear his commentary than the actual film. Their differences didn't divide them, they educated each other. But beneath the joy, something else lived quietly, something neither of them said out loud. Richard sometimes withdrew when life grew heavy. He would retreat into himself, not out of malice, but out of habit, a lifetime of being taught that emotional struggle shouldn't be spoken aloud. Tiana noticed it early on, but she didn't push. She believed marriage gave people room to grow, room to unfold at their own pace. Yet one night, while cleaning up after dinner, she realized how often he disappeared into silence. Not angry silence, not cold silence. Just distance. The kind of distance she had seen in couples who pretended everything was fine until it wasn't. She leaned against the counter, feeling a small weight settle in her chest. Not fear, not disappointment, just awareness. And this was the very beginning of the first silence. The tiny crack that didn't break anything yet. The quiet space where she didn't know how to reach him, and he didn't know how to let himself be reached. Still, they loved each other. Still, they built a home. Still, they believed in the life they were creating. But the pressure, his lifelong pressure to keep things looking intact, controlled, appropriate, followed him like a shadow. Tiana sensed it without fully understanding it. Richard felt it without knowing how to explain it. That unspoken pressure was the seed, small, hidden, almost invisible, that would one day grow into the silence that separated them. She couldn't see the betrayal in their future. He couldn't imagine a moment where his choices would hurt her. Neither of them dreamed that a night would come when 3 plates sat on a dining table waiting for the truth. Their marriage began in hope, real hope, earned hope. The kind that makes you believe you found a partner whose flaws you can live alongside. Neither of them knew that the flaw Richard struggled with most, the pressure he never addressed, would become the very thing that tested their promises. But for now, in this chapter of their story, they were still choosing each other fully, unaware of how much their silence would one day cost. The first sign was small enough that Tiana almost ignored it. A phone turning face down on the kitchen counter didn't mean danger. Plenty of people did that to avoid distractions. So the first time Richard did it, she barely thought about it. She was standing near the stove, stirring pasta, and he walked past her with a soft kiss on her cheek before placing his phone screen down beside the sink. No alarm went off in her mind, no suspicion, just a faint flicker of discomfort, the kind you brush away because you trust someone. Dinner that night was simple, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, a side salad. They talked, but the flow wasn't what it used to be. His answers came a little slower. His eyes drifted toward the hallway more than toward her. She told herself he was tired. But the next day, the phone went face down again. And the day after that, At first, she tried to rationalize it. He's working on something important. Maybe his job is stressing him out. Maybe he just doesn't want notifications interrupting dinner. But the truth was quieter than all those excuses. Something had shifted in their house, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough for her to feel it. Before, they used to talk freely, about work, about their dreams, about how different their childhoods were, her Atlanta community life, his structured New England upbringing, about how they wanted to travel more one day. But now conversations shrank into something smaller. "You good?" she asked one night as he walked in. "Yeah. Just tired," he said, already loosening his tie. "Want to talk about it?" "Not really. It's nothing." Nothing. That word became his shield. He didn't mean to shut her out. She could tell. His tone wasn't harsh. He wasn't cold. He just wasn't fully there. He still kissed her goodnight, but the kiss was brief. He still hugged her goodbye in the mornings, but his mind seemed somewhere else. When she rested her hand on his arm during a movie night, he didn't pull away. Yet he also didn't lean in the way he used to. It was subtle. It was quiet. And that made it worse. Because silence doesn't scream. It sinks. One evening, he texted, "Running late. Don't wait up." She read it twice. Richard wasn't a don't wait up kind of man. He used to rush home because being with her helped him unwind. But in the weeks that followed, the messages became a pattern. Have to finish something important. Staying a little later than planned. Big client issue. The explanations changed each time. The distance behind them didn't. She didn't question him at first. She knew what pressure looked like. She'd seen it in her community, seen it in people trying to hold everything together without falling apart. But something inside her, something instinctive, started paying closer attention. When he came home late, he looked drained. But in a different way. Not physically drained, emotionally drained. The kind of drain that comes from carrying something you're not saying. His tie was loosened, his shoulders tight, his smiles forced. "How was work?" she asked gently. He gave the same answer every time. "Fine." But his eyes said something else, something carefully hidden, something she couldn't reach no matter how softly she asked. There were evenings when Tayana cooked dinner and the sound of the knife hitting the cutting board echoed in ways it never used to. Little pockets of quiet filled the rooms, settling into corners where laughter used to live. She tried to keep things normal, lighting candles, turning on music, sitting beside him with a blanket when they watched TV. But even the blanket felt like a barrier now. Once, during a show they used to follow together, she laughed at a scene and looked over to see if he laughed too. He didn't. He was staring at his phone, screen down. When she leaned closer to rest her head on his shoulder, he shifted slightly, not enough to reject her, but enough that she felt the space between them widen. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. It was distance wrapped in politeness. And that hurt more than anger ever could. Because good women do that. Women who grew up in places where family mattered, where partnership was sacred, where love was something you nurtured with intention. Women who learned early that when something feels off, you check yourself before assuming the worst. She lay in bed one night while Richard slept beside her, his back slightly turned, and she wondered, am the firsts not enough lately? Did I do something wrong? Is he stressed because of me? She even replayed old conversations, trying to find a moment where maybe she'd been too tired, too distracted, too emotional, too quiet. She looked inward because she didn't want to believe the problem was outward. But somewhere between the self-doubt and the silence, she realized something else. She wasn't imagining this. She wasn't overreacting. She wasn't insecure. She was present, and she was no longer being seen. That realization didn't hit her like a slap. It settled slowly, the way dusk settles over a neighborhood before you realize the sunlight is gone. Tayana didn't cry. She didn't panic. She didn't blame him out loud. Instead, she walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and let the coolness steady her. Her grandmother always said, when the air changes in your house, don't pretend you don't feel it. Pay attention. So she did. She paid attention. To the turned-down phone. To the shorter answers. To the tired smiles. To the excuses that didn't match his eyes. To the quiet ache living in the spaces they used to fill together. Tayana wasn't afraid yet. She wasn't angry yet. She was becoming aware, painfully aware, that something was slipping from her grasp, not because she let go, but because he had started holding life differently. And this awareness, The quiet kind, the kind she didn't voice, was the beginning of everything that would follow, the ache of being present but no longer truly seen. The second sign didn't sneak in quietly the way the first ones did. It arrived all at once, the kind of moment that makes your body react before your mind can explain why. It happened on a Sunday evening. Tiana had spent most of the afternoon cleaning the house, playing her favorite old-school playlist, letting the music fill the space the way Richard used to. She dusted the shelves, folded laundry, and lit a soft candle in the living room. The apartment smelled warm, familiar, like a home she'd fought to build with him. Richard texted earlier saying he would be home around 7. She didn't question it. Lately, questioning anything felt like stepping into territory she wasn't sure she had permission to explore anymore. When the clock hit 7:22, she heard his key in the lock. She didn't expect fireworks or affection. The distance from the past few weeks had already softened her expectations. But she still turned toward the door, ready to greet him the way she always had. What she didn't expect was the scent. When he stepped into the living room, the air changed instantly. Not dramatically, not with force, but enough to make her inhale twice because the smell didn't belong to her. It was soft, floral, familiar but not from her home. A fragrance she recognized from women who passed her at work or in the grocery store. A perfume she didn't own. A perfume she didn't wear. A perfume she'd never smelled on Richard until now. Her heartbeat didn't speed up in a dramatic way. It slowed, deep, controlled, like her body was bracing itself. He set his bag down and gave her a small smile, the same tired smile he'd been giving lately. "Hey," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. She held still when his face came near hers. The closer he was, the stronger the smell became. Not detergent, not workplace scent. Perfume. A woman's perfume. She didn't pull away. She stayed steady, gathering the pieces of herself. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Yeah, just a long day," he replied, heading toward the bedroom without looking back. His tone wasn't sharp. His words weren't suspicious, but the scent wouldn't leave her mind. She followed him down the hall, watching as he removed his jacket. His movements were normal, routine. Nothing about him gave the impression that he noticed anything was off, but she noticed everything. Instead of confronting him immediately, instead of letting panic take over, she sat on the edge of the bed, her breath steady but shallow. Her thoughts didn't rush. They arranged themselves with painful clarity. Maybe he hugged someone goodbye. Maybe someone brushed past him. Maybe he walked through a scented store. Maybe. She tried to give him an excuse, not because she believed it, but because she wanted to. Fear didn't come in fast. It crept in quietly, sitting beside her on the mattress like a shadow she didn't invite. For a moment, she closed her eyes. And without meaning to, her mind offered her a memory from their first year together, a night when he came home from work exhausted, overwhelmed, defeated. He slid into the bed beside her and whispered, "I feel safe with you." Back then, it wasn't perfume he carried home. It was vulnerability. Back then, he used to lean into her body like someone returning to shelter. Back then, she felt his presence long before she heard his keys in the door. Now, she felt distance, even when he stood in front of her. She opened her eyes again, staring at the dresser, at her reflection in the mirror. A woman trying to stay reasonable while her heart begged her to ask the question she wasn't ready to voice. When Richard came back into the bedroom, freshly changed, she studied his face carefully. He didn't seem nervous. He didn't avoid her eyes. But there was a layer, a thin one, of emotional fog she couldn't see through anymore. "How was your day?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. He shrugged lightly. "Busy." "A lot going on. Anything happen?" she asked casually. He shook his head. Nothing special, but something smelled special. Something that didn't belong in their home. She didn't press further. She didn't accuse. She didn't let her voice betray the storm forming inside her. Instead, she nodded slowly and said, "Okay." Later that night, when they climbed into bed, the perfume still lingered faintly in the sheets from where he had sat earlier. She lay on her side, facing the window, listening to Richard's breathing beside her. He fell asleep quickly, almost too quickly, while she stared into the quiet room, eyes open, heart heavy. She wasn't a woman who jumped to conclusions. She wasn't someone who searched for problems. She was raised by women who taught her patience, taught her trust, taught her not to accuse without reason. But reason was now resting in the air between them, undeniable, unmistakable, wearing notes of a fragrance she didn't know how to forget. She finally whispered into the darkness, "God, please let me be wrong." But she didn't feel wrong. And that was the moment, the exact moment, when suspicion stopped being a passing thought and became something she could no longer explain away. She closed her eyes, but sleep refused to come. Her mind kept circling back to one truth. This scent didn't come from her, and it didn't appear by accident. She breathed deeply, trying to calm her chest, trying to understand how everything she built with him, all the slow warmth, the steady love, the marriage forged in hope, could shift so silently. But the truth was simple. Something was happening. Something she didn't have evidence for, not yet, but something her spirit recognized before her mind caught up. Suspicion was no longer a whisper. It was a certainty waiting for proof. And it was only the beginning. It happened on a Thursday night. The kind of night where nothing unusual was supposed to happen. The kind where dinner leftovers were in the fridge, the TV played quietly in the background, and the world outside their apartment window looked still. Richard had fallen asleep on the couch, half turned toward the cushions, breathing evenly. He'd come home late again, exhausted in that way he'd been for weeks. Tiana watched him for a moment from the hallway, not with suspicion, not with anger, but with a heaviness she couldn't shake. His face looked peaceful when he slept, almost like the man she used to know. But peace can be deceiving when the truth is hiding underneath it. She carried a blanket into the living room and draped it over him gently. That's when his phone buzzed. Just once. A short vibration. She froze. Not because she wanted to see anything, but because her body reacted faster than her mind. She knew the sound of his notifications. This one was different. Softer. Muted. A tone he hadn't used before. She didn't touch the phone. She didn't even lean toward it. But Richard shifted slightly, and the blanket slid down enough for the phone to tilt toward her. For a split second, one breath, one heartbeat, the message lit up on the screen. Just enough for her to see it. Just enough for everything inside her to splinter. "Did you get home safe? I miss you." The words weren't long. They weren't poetic. They weren't dramatic. But they were unmistakably intimate. The screen dimmed before she could blink again. And in that moment, that quiet, accidental moment, her world shifted. She felt her throat tighten, her stomach drop, her legs weaken. Not because she was shocked, but because something inside her had been preparing for this without her wanting to admit it. The perfume, the turned-down phone, the shorter conversations, the emotional distance, all of it aligned now, forming a truth she didn't want to hold. Her first instinct wasn't rage. It wasn't confrontation. It wasn't even grief. It was stillness. A deep, overwhelming stillness that wrapped itself around her like a heavy blanket. She stepped back slowly, careful not to make a sound, careful not to wake him, careful not to let her breathing break. Her heart wasn't racing, it was sinking, and that sinking felt worse than any burst of anger ever could. She walked into the bathroom, closed the door gently, and sat on the edge of the tub. The same place she had sat before, weeks earlier, when suspicion first whispered to her. She placed her elbows on her knees and pressed her palms against her forehead. For a long time, she didn't cry. She didn't even think. She just felt the weight of it, the betrayal of it, the quiet devastation that comes when someone you trusted chooses someone else in the shadows. The bathroom light hummed softly above her. The mirror reflected a woman who looked steady but broken at the same time. She whispered to herself, "So this is what it feels like." Not loud, not dramatic. Just honest. Her grandmother used to say, every woman has a moment where her heart has to choose between breaking and waking. Right now, she felt both. Her chest tightened as the first tear slipped down her cheek. Not a sob, not a cry, just one tear carrying months of confusion. She wiped it quickly, almost angrily. She didn't want to fall apart. Not yet. Not here. She stared at the floor until the tiles blurred. She dug her nails into her palms, grounding herself in something physical, something real. She felt the ache in her throat deepen, and finally the tears came. Soft, restrained, painful. Not the loud kind. The kind that takes your breath in quiet waves. The kind of tears women cry when their spirit recognizes a truth their mind isn't ready for. Tiana had been raised around strong women. Not perfect women, not unbreakable women, but women who survived heartbreak without letting it turn them into someone they didn't want to be. Women who prayed when they felt lost. Women who stood tall even when their knees wanted to buckle. Women who believed in partnership but refused to lose themselves inside it. As she sat there, she remembered the lessons drilled into her since childhood. Your worth isn't determined by a man's choices. Don't let heartbreak make you small. Strength isn't noise, it's clarity. Right now, she needed all three. She inhaled deeply, letting the breath fill her lungs. She exhaled slowly, letting the truth settle into her bones. He was involved with someone else. She didn't know how long. She didn't know who. She didn't know the details. But she knew enough. And the worst part wasn't the cheating itself. It was that he gave another woman the emotional softness he was withholding from her. The presence, the attention, the tenderness she had earned, but no longer received. This wasn't just betrayal. It was abandonment, the emotional kind. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that doesn't hit. The kind that slowly empties a room until you're the only one standing there, wondering when the other person stopped choosing you. Tayana stood up slowly, wiped her face and looked at herself in the mirror again. Red eyes, tear-streaked cheeks, but still composed, still whole. She wasn't going to wake him. She wasn't going to shake him. She wasn't going to demand answers from a man who wasn't ready to tell the truth. Not tonight, because tonight wasn't about him. Tonight was about her acceptance, painful, necessary acceptance. She turned off the bathroom light and stepped into the hallway, walking past the couch without looking directly at him. The message replayed in her mind, every word carving a deeper line inside her. Did you get home safe? I miss you, she whispered under her breath, almost like she was speaking to the version of herself she used to be. You deserved better than this. She walked into the bedroom, climbing under the covers alone. The distance between the living room and the bed felt like a world. And for the first time since they married, the bed felt unfamiliar, like she was lying beside a future she no longer recognized. Before she closed her eyes, she whispered the question that many women have whispered before her. Why wasn't I enough for you to stay honest? She didn't ask it for an answer. She asked it because it was the only thing she could hold on to in that moment. Then, with her heart heavy and her spirit bruised, she let the truth settle beside her, not spoken, not argued, not confronted, just carried. If you were in Tayana's position, what would you do next? She lay there awake for hours, realizing this wasn't just cheating, this was emotional abandonment. And it was only the beginning of the storm she would one day face with calmness that froze an entire room. Morning light slipped into the bedroom softly, the way it always did, spreading across the blankets and creeping toward the edge of the bed where Tayana lay awake. She hadn't slept much. Her eyes were open long before the sun appeared. But her body was still, calm in a way that didn't match the storm she endured the night before. Richard's breathing was steady beside her. It sounded too peaceful. It sounded like the sleep of a man who had no idea what truth had already revealed itself. She didn't turn toward him. She didn't study his face. She didn't wait for guilt to show up. Not anymore. Instead, she watched the ceiling and let her mind clear itself, piece by piece, until what remained wasn't panic or sorrow, but intention. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it grows in silence. When Richard finally stirred, stretching slightly, she listened without reacting. He checked the time on his phone, rubbed his eyes and sat up with the same morning routine he always had. "Tay," he murmured, his voice coated with sleep. "You awake?" "Yes," she said simply. He didn't sense anything in her tone. He didn't hear what she wasn't saying. He didn't realize he was moving through a morning already changed. He got out of bed and walked into the bathroom, the door closing behind him. The water started running. Steam drifted from the crack in the door. Tayana sat up slowly, letting her feet touch the floor. Her chest still hurt, but the pain wasn't unraveling her. It was guiding her. It was reminding her of something she'd forgotten in recent weeks. She had a voice. She had boundaries. She had dignity. And today, she would use all three. When Richard returned to the bedroom, dressed in his work clothes, adjusting his collar, he still didn't notice the shift in her. "Are you okay?" he asked lightly, glancing at her briefly before reaching for his watch. She nodded once. "I'm fine." He accepted that answer too easily. He didn't pause. He didn't look deeper. He didn't ask again. That was the problem, not just today, but for months. He moved around the room with the same distracted energy he'd had lately, checking emails, buttoning his shirt, fixing his cuffs, avoiding eye contact without realizing he was avoiding it. She watched quietly, her face still, her hands resting in her lap, not to intimidate him, but because she needed to see him clearly. Not the man she hoped he would be, not the man she married, the man he was right now, someone who had drifted so far from their marriage that he didn't feel her shifting beside him. He didn't ask about her plans for the day. He didn't ask how she slept. He didn't sense that something had changed in the space between them. He kissed her forehead before heading toward the door, the way he always did. Except now, she didn't lean in. She didn't soften. And he didn't notice that either. After he left, the apartment fell into a quiet that didn't hurt, not like before. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself a cup of tea, and sat at the small table by the window. The cup warmed her hands, anchoring her to the moment. She thought about everything she had ever wanted from love. Peace, not confusion. Honesty, not guessing games. Partnership, not imbalance. A home where truth lived freely. She remembered the woman she was before marriage, hopeful, open, ready for a man who could meet her emotionally. She remembered the promises she made to herself before she ever promised anything to Richard. I will not lose myself in someone else's silence. Yet here she was, on the edge of losing herself if she didn't act now. Not by yelling, not by accusing, not by begging. By reclaiming her clarity, by saying aloud what had been weighing on her, by creating a moment where the truth had no shadows to hide in. A dinner, not a trap, not a performance, not revenge. A table where honesty had no exit door. She didn't want to embarrass him. She didn't want to compete with another woman. She didn't want drama. She wanted the truth, not the version he curated, but the version he hid. The decision didn't come as a burst of anger. It arrived the way resolve does, slowly, steadily, like water rising until you finally stand. She set her tea down and took a deep breath. I need to see the truth without excuses. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't unraveling. She was stepping into the moment her spirit had been preparing her for. The dinner wasn't punishment. It was a mirror, a space where two people who had made choices, him through betrayal, her through strength, would finally sit without illusions. As she stood from the table, something inside her aligned. Not bitterness, not rage. Clarity. This wasn't about the other woman. It wasn't even about the message. It was about Tayana reclaiming her seat in her own marriage, not as a silent partner, but as a woman who deserved truth. She whispered into the quiet room, "I'm stronger than what you hid from me." And she was. Strength doesn't always show up in grand gestures. Sometimes it's a woman waking up after heartbreak, deciding she will not be swallowed by silence. Sometimes it's choosing clarity over chaos, dignity over confusion, purpose over fear. This morning, Tayana didn't break. She became steady. Her resolve wasn't fiery. It was clean. Her intention wasn't violent. It was grounded. This was the moment her story shifted from being something that happened to her to something she would take control of. Quiet strength, unshaken clarity, a decision made not from pain, but from purpose. And this decision would lead her toward the table that would freeze three people in place. The apartment felt different when Tayana stepped back inside after her short morning walk. She'd gone outside to breathe, to let the cool air settle her nerves and give her clarity. She didn't need long. Her mind already knew what her heart was ready to execute. Today was the day she would prepare the table, the physical one and the emotional one. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because truth needed a place to sit. She locked the door behind her and looked around the living room. Nothing in the apartment had changed, yet everything felt charged. Even the sunlight filtering through the curtains carried a weight she hadn't noticed before. She walked slowly toward the dining area, her footsteps soft on the hardwood floor. The table sat in the center, quiet, still, innocent in its purpose. It had carried meals, laughter, quiet talks, random conversations that once felt effortless. It had been a space of connection. Today, it would be a space of clarity. Tayana pulled out the chairs one by one, sliding them into neat alignment. She didn't rush, she moved with precise, deliberate intention. The kind of intention that comes from knowing a moment will change the course of everything. She opened the cabinet and reached for the plates, the white ceramic set they bought together in their first year of marriage. She remembered how Richard picked them because they looked clean and simple. She'd teased him about being too practical, but she grew to appreciate the calmness of their design. She placed the first plate at the head of the table. Her seat, the seat of the woman who had carried the emotional weight of the marriage without dropping it. She placed the second plate across from her, Richard's seat, the seat of a man who had forgotten what honesty looks like in a home. Then she placed the third plate beside his, but slightly angled, a subtle reminder that the woman who stepped into their marriage didn't walk in through the front door. She came in tilted, crooked, sideways. But tonight, she would sit in plain view. 3 plates, 3 seats, 3 truths waiting to be spoken. Tayana stepped back and looked at the table. The sight of it didn't weaken her. It steadied her. It reminded her that she wasn't acting in impulse. She was building a moment for honesty, a moment long overdue. She reached for the silverware and paused as a memory crept into her chest, a memory so soft it almost hurt to hold. It was their first month of living together. Richard had insisted on cooking dinner to surprise her, but he burned nearly everything. They ate takeout instead, sitting at this very table, laughing until her stomach hurt. He'd reached across the table then, touching her hand lightly. "Tay, I want us to always talk, no matter what." She remembered how warm she felt hearing those words. She believed him. She trusted him. She married him partly because he seemed like a man who valued communication. But somewhere along the way, without arguments, without warnings, their table had become quieter, their meals quicker, their conversations thinner. The silence wasn't sudden. It grew slowly, the way distance always does. As she placed forks beside each plate, she sensed another memory slipping in, their first Christmas together. Her family had come over, filling the apartment with noise and jokes and the kind of warmth Richard wasn't used to. He looked overwhelmed, but happy. She remembered thinking, he fits here. He fits with me. Now she wondered if he ever truly did, or if he had simply adjusted himself to survive the moments. She shook her head softly, grounding herself. Tonight wasn't about the memories. Tonight was about the truth. As she folded the napkins, her hands tightened slightly. The pain in her chest hadn't disappeared. It was simply behaving, sitting quietly, waiting. Part of her wanted to delete the message from her mind, pretend she never saw it, let the silence stay untouched. Some women chose that path, choosing survival over confrontation because the truth felt too sharp to hold. But Tayana had been raised differently. Her mother always said, if you let hurt live quietly in your house, it will spread. She wasn't going to let it spread. Still, the conflict inside her was real. Pain pressed against her ribs, trying to make her question herself. Dignity stood firm, refusing to bend. There was a moment, a long, still moment, where she almost picked up the 3rd plate and returned it to the cabinet. Almost. Her hand hovered over it. She imagined the alternative, pretending nothing was wrong. Playing along, waiting for Richard to eventually confess or never confess, letting herself shrink piece by piece. But that thought alone straightened her spine. "No," she whispered. "I won't disappear in my own marriage." She placed the 3rd plate back where it belonged. Firmly, deliberately. The internal tug-of-war grew stronger as she moved to set the glasses on the table. Her hand trembled slightly for the first time all morning. Her breath caught. A thought pushed at her, sharp, emotional, startling. What if this breaks everything? The room felt too quiet. Her chest felt too heavy. Her pride and her heartbreak were arguing silently. For a moment she leaned against the back of a chair, closing her eyes. The fear of rupture, the fear of hearing Richard admit the truth out loud, crawled up her throat. She imagined him sitting across from her tonight, unable to deny what happened. She imagined the other woman sitting in that angled seat, avoiding her eyes. She imagined the pain of hearing details she didn't want, didn't ask for, didn't deserve. Her pulse quickened, not out of weakness, but out of anticipation of the unknown. She almost walked away, almost decided to postpone, almost convinced herself that peace meant avoiding the truth. But then she remembered the message again. "Did you get home safe? I miss you." Her eyes opened. Her breath steadied. Her resolve returned. She stood upright and finished the table without hesitation. The woman who nearly canceled was gone. The woman who remained was intentional. Tayana stepped back and looked at the fully set table. 3 plates, 3 glasses, 3 seats waiting. The sight didn't break her. It empowered her. She didn't ask for betrayal. She didn't ask for confusion. She didn't ask to be dragged into someone else's choices. But she could reclaim control. She wasn't staging a showdown. She wasn't chasing drama. She was creating a moment where truth had nowhere left to escape. For the first time in weeks, she felt her heartbeat return to its natural rhythm. Steady, certain, centered. Strength isn't loud. Strength is a woman deciding she will not be erased. Tonight's dinner wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming her position at the head of her own life. The table was ready. And so was she. The table was set. The plates were in place. The room was still. But the moment wasn't complete until she made the calls, the ones she'd been building towards since the late-night message shattered the last layer of denial inside her. Tiana stood at the edge of the dining room, her hand loosely holding her phone. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingers, not pounding in fear, but steady with intention. The sunlight had shifted, laying across the table in a warm tone, softening the sharpness of the situation she was about to walk into. She inhaled gently. She exhaled slowly. She wasn't trembling. If anything, she felt clearer than she had in weeks. She scrolled to Richard's name. It used to bring comfort when she saw it, a familiarity, a reassurance. Today, it brought something else, a finality, a line drawn. She pressed the call button. It rang twice before he answered. "Hey, Tay," he said. His tone was neutral, unaware, unguarded. That was almost painful, how untouched he still was by what she knew. "I need you home for dinner tonight," she said. Her voice was steady, almost calm enough to disguise the storm. Richard paused. "Dinner? I thought you said you'd be working late. I changed my schedule." He hesitated again. "Everything okay?" There it was, the question she had expected, but even now, he sounded distant, like he was asking out of habit rather than concern. "Yes," she replied. "Dinner at the usual time." "All right," he said slowly. "Do you need me to bring anything?" "No, just truth," she thought. But she didn't say that out loud. The silence that followed was short, but she felt him listening for clues, for warmth, for anything familiar in her tone. He found none. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll see you tonight." She didn't say "I love you." She didn't say "see you soon." She simply ended the call and let the quiet return. And in that quiet, she felt herself change shape, not harder, not colder, but more certain. Tiana knew Richard well enough to understand something essential. He feared emotional intensity. He feared voices raised. He feared confrontation. But this, her stillness, her neutrality, this was the one thing he didn't know how to interpret. He recognized anger. He recognized disappointment. He had no idea how to read a woman who spoke like she had already accepted the truth. It would unsettle him, not because she wanted it to, but because his guilt would eventually catch up to her calm. He just didn't know it yet. This was the part she dreaded, not out of fear, but out of the heaviness that comes with acknowledging another woman's place in a story that wasn't hers to enter. She didn't have the mistress's number saved, of course. But the message she saw on Richard's phone the night before came from a contact that displayed only a number, no name. She typed it into her phone slowly, exhaling as she decided which path to take. Calling might start a panic. Calling might make the woman defensive. Calling might turn clarity into chaos. She chose text instead. Neutral, direct, unmistakable. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She didn't want to be disrespectful. She didn't want violence. She didn't want a scene. She wanted only truth, the truth both of them had danced around in different ways. So she wrote, "Good evening. I would like you to join us for dinner tonight, 7 p.m. You already know the address." She read it once, twice, 3 times. No insults, no sarcasm, no emotion, just a statement of fact and a quiet invitation into honesty. She sent it. The message delivered instantly. She waited. Seconds passed, then a full minute, then another. Her phone buzzed. A short reply came through. "Is Richard okay?" Tiana's eyes narrowed just slightly, not in anger, but in recognition. Even now, the woman's concern went to him first. Not the wife, not the truth. Him. She typed, "He will be here. Please come." No explanation, no context, no opening for excuses. Her thumb hovered over the send button, and she thought about every woman she'd seen growing up, the kind who loved deeply but refused to be silent in their own homes. Women who faced betrayal without shrinking. Women who believed in addressing truth rather than hiding from it. She pressed send. Another reply came quickly. "I'm not sure I should." Tiana deleted it without finishing the message. Tonight was happening. Whether the mistress came from courage or fear wasn't her concern. Her part was done. When everything was set, the plates, the glasses, the silverware, the messages, she walked into the bedroom and stood in front of the mirror. The reflection staring back at her looked the same, but felt different. Her eyes were steady. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her breath was even. Her spirit was grounded. She wasn't broken. She wasn't unraveling. She wasn't drowning. She was preparing. She leaned closer to the mirror, studying her face the way she used to before important speeches at work or family gatherings where she needed to hold her own. She whispered, "I'm not the one who should be afraid." Not as a threat, not as a victory chant, but as a truth she finally believed. Fear belonged to the people who hid. Fear belonged to the people who lied. Fear belonged to the people who built their world on secrecy. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't lying. She wasn't building anything on secrecy. The fear did not belong to her. She stepped back, smoothing her shirt, steadying her hands. She looked at the dining table one more time. The weight of what she had set in motion didn't intimidate her. It clarified her. Tonight was not a battle. Tonight was not revenge. Tonight was not chaos. Tonight was truth, clear, unavoidable, and ready to be spoken. Richard would walk into this home later believing it was just dinner. He would freeze when he saw the third plate. He would sense her calm before she spoke a word. He would feel the weight of everything he had avoided. He would panic, quietly, internally, deeply. Tayana, on the other hand, she would not raise her voice. She would not shake. She would not break. Her composure would be the sharpest truth in the room, and for the first time in their marriage, the emotional imbalance would reverse. Richard, scrambling, exposed. Tayana, steady, unflinching. Dinner was no longer a meal. It was a turning point, one she was finally ready to face. The clock on the wall clicked softly towards 7 o'clock, each second falling into the room like a reminder. The table was ready. The air was still. Tayana sat at the head of the table, her posture calm, her breath steady, her eyes focused on nothing in particular and everything at once. She wasn't rehearsing lines. She wasn't preparing speeches. She wasn't imagining how either of them would react. She was simply ready, the kind of ready that grows in a woman's spirit when she stops being afraid of truth. There was a small sound outside, a car slowing, then stopping, the crunch of tires against the pavement, a door opening, another door closing. Richard, the familiar rhythm of his steps, approached the front door. Even after all these years, she could tell his pace just by the way he walked. Slightly hurried, slightly deliberate, like a man always trying to be dependable, even when his heart wasn't. He pushed the key into the lock, turned it, opened the door. "Tayana," he called softly, the same tone he always used when entering the house. He stepped inside with that tired attempt of a smile, the one he had practiced for weeks to cover whatever he didn't want to say. But the smile vanished the moment he entered the dining room. He froze, completely. His eyes locked onto the table, 3 plates, 3 glasses, each placed with intention. Then he saw her, sitting at the head of the table, not angry, not trembling, not pleading, just composed, steady, unmoved. "Tay, what's going on?" he asked, his voice dropping into confusion. She didn't answer, not yet. Her silence wasn't avoidance. It was truth waiting. Richard's eyes darted back to the table, then to her, then to the angled third chair, and that's when he realized she wasn't alone tonight. Outside, footsteps approached. Soft, hesitant, slower than his. The Mistress. Her silhouette appeared at the doorway for just a second before she stepped inside fully. She kept her gaze low, her posture folding in on itself as she walked deeper into the room. When Richard saw her, his face drained of color. "Why are you here?" he whispered to the woman, a question he meant rhetorically, not practically, because deep down he already knew why she was here. He knew exactly what this was. But the Mistress wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Tayana, only briefly, before dropping her eyes again. And for a moment, everything was silent, not peaceful, not gentle, just heavily aware, the kind of silence that forms when truth steps into the room and locks the doors behind it. Richard swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Tayana, please tell me what's going on." She didn't move. Her voice didn't rise. Instead, she spoke with a calmness that made both of them stiffen. "You've both been eating in secret," she said softly. "So tonight, you can eat here, in front of me." The words didn't need force. They didn't need repetition. They landed like a weight neither of them could hold. The Mistress shifted uncomfortably, her hands clasping together. She tried to speak, but her voice caught. Richard took a step toward Tayana, then stopped himself. Listen, Tay, let's talk privately. This is exactly where it needs to happen, she said, cutting through his sentence without raising her voice. Her calm was more powerful than any anger could have been. Her steadiness was a mirror he couldn't escape. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't recognize the woman sitting across from him. She wasn't broken. She wasn't fragile. She wasn't bending. She was in control. He glanced at the mistress as if hoping she would offer him an explanation, a shield, something to lean on. But she was just as paralyzed as he was. The temperature in the room shifted, not physically but emotionally, spiritually, atmospherically. The air tightened. The energy thickened. Every breath felt heavier. This was the moment none of them could undo. Tayana, why are you doing this? Richard asked, his voice cracking slightly. She lifted her eyes and met his, not with rage, not with sorrow, but with truth. For clarity, she said simply, and because lies shouldn't live where I eat. The mistress lowered her head again, guilt tightening her shoulders. Richard exhaled shakily. Can we just talk? Please. We are talking, she replied. All three of us. He dragged a hand across his face, his body tense, his composure unraveling in slow, painful inches. He wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't ready to face both women at once. He wasn't ready to see himself reflected in a situation he'd created with his choices. But Tayana was ready. She had been ready since she set the first plate down. Sit, she said quietly. Richard hesitated, but he sat. The mistress hesitated too, but she followed. The truth finally had a room of its own. A room full of truth that could not escape. And for the first time since the marriage began to crack, they were all in the same place, with nowhere to hide, no excuses left untouched, no secrets left in the dark. This dinner had begun. The three of them sat at the table, but nobody reached for the food. Nobody touched a utensil. Nobody breathed normally. There are moments when a room feels too small for the truth it has to hold. This was one of those moments. Richard sat stiffly, his fingers tapping the edge of the napkin, eyes darting between Tayana and the mistress like he was waiting for a script to appear. The mistress stared at her hands, shoulders curled inward, shrinking in on herself. Tayana was the only one steady. She rested her palms gently on the table, not clenched, not defensive, just present. It was striking, how she could command the room without raising her voice. Richard cleared his throat first, the sound thin and strained. Tayana, you didn't have to do this. Her gaze lifted, calm and unshaken. That's your first mistake, assuming I'm doing this for you. The mistress flinched slightly at the tone, not because it was harsh, but because it was painfully composed. Richard dragged in a shaky breath. Listen, I know what it looks like. What does it look like? Tayana asked, cutting him off with quiet precision. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Words crowded behind his lips, but none made it out. She waited. Her silence pressed harder than any accusation could have. He tried again. I should have talked to you. Things got complicated and I... Complicated? She repeated, tilting her head slightly. You walked into a marriage with me. You didn't walk into a maze. He looked down, shame creeping into his posture. The mistress finally spoke, her voice small, almost breaking. I didn't mean for things to go this way. Tayana turned her eyes to her, not cold, but firm. You meant something. Let's not pretend it was an accident. The woman swallowed hard. Richard told me. He told me things were difficult between you two. Richard's head snapped up. I didn't say it like that. You said enough, the mistress whispered. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the low hum of the refrigerator in the background, an ordinary noise in an extraordinary moment. Tayana leaned back slightly, folding her hands in her lap. Richard, she said, I want you to look at me. He hesitated, then obeyed. Did you tell her our marriage was falling apart? He blinked rapidly. I didn't say that exactly. I just did. You say it. His jaw tightened. Yes. Not in those words, but yes. Tayana nodded once. Not a nod of acceptance, a nod of acknowledgement. The kind you give when a puzzle piece finally clicks, even if it hurts. The mistress looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. I thought he was being honest about what he felt. Tayana turned to her. And you didn't think to ask me, the wife, the one who shares a home with him? I didn't know how, the mistress whispered. You found your way into the relationship, Tayana replied. You could have found your way to the truth. Richard swallowed hard. Tay, please, this isn't fair. You don't get to talk about fairness, she said, her tone soft but final. You forfeited that when you stopped being honest months ago. He looked away again. And this was the moment the tension cracked open. Not with yelling, not with slammed fists, with truth. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said shakily. I didn't plan any of this. I just felt lost. How long have you been lost? She asked. He blinked. I don't know. Yes, you do. His breath hitched. Maybe 6 months, maybe longer. The mistress's eyes widened. She hadn't known the timeline. Her guilt deepened instantly. 6 months, Tayana repeated. 6 months of eating with someone else, talking with someone else, laughing with someone else, holding secrets with someone else. Her voice never rose, but every word landed with precision. Richard ran his hands through his hair. I wasn't myself, Tay. You were exactly yourself. That's the part that hurts. The mistress finally looked up, her eyes wet. I didn't know he was lying to both of us, she said quietly. I thought you two were separated emotionally. He said you didn't understand him anymore. Tayana inhaled slowly. He told you that? The mistress nodded. Tayana turned to Richard again. Is that what you told her? He didn't answer. Richard, he exhaled, defeated. I didn't say it to hurt you. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. She nodded again, calm, firm, accepting the truth without letting it break her spirit. You didn't know how to talk to me, she echoed. But you knew how to talk to her? His silence said everything. She leaned forward just slightly. Did you ever plan to tell me? He stared at the table. I don't know. Did you ever think about ending this? Another silence. Did you love her? She asked. The mistress snapped her gaze up to him, startled. Richard froze. Tayana, please, answer the question. His voice came out tiny. I don't know. That was the real wound. Not the cheating, not the secret dinners, not the perfume, not the message. The uncertainty, the emotional vacancy, the cowardice. You didn't just cheat, Tayana said softly. You abandoned the work. You abandoned the conversations. You abandoned the effort our marriage deserved. The mistress lowered her head again, tears forming. You let someone else hold the space you were supposed to hold with me, Tayana continued. And you let her believe something that was never true. Richard's hands trembled against the table. Tay, please, can we talk alone? Just you and me? He asked, voice breaking. She shook her head once. You made these conversations shared. You don't get to privatize the consequences. For the first time, the mistress spoke with something other than guilt, something closer to realization. He told me he wanted to figure things out with you, she whispered. But he also told me he didn't want to lose me. Richard closed his eyes in shame. Tayana's expression didn't waver. Of course he did, she said. Men who hide don't like to choose. The mistress covered her face, crying quietly. Richard whispered, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But sorry was not the currency of this table. Truth was. Tayana sat back slowly, steady as ever. Before the night breaks open, she said softly, her voice warm but firm. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss stories like this. She let the line settle naturally before continuing. No break in character, no shift in tone. Then she lifted her eyes again. Now, she said, let's finish this conversation. The room waited. The truth was only halfway out, and the collapse was still coming. The room felt suspended, as if time was holding itself still, waiting for the moment everything would finally break open. 3 plates sat untouched. 3 people sat frozen in their own versions of truth. And Tayana sat at the head of the table, unshaken, watching the man she married slowly lose his ability to hold himself together. Richard's breathing grew uneven. His forehead creased. His fingers tightened around the napkin until it nearly tore. Tayana, he whispered, I made a mistake. She didn't respond. She didn't flinch. She let silence be the mirror he deserved. The mistress wiped her cheeks, avoiding both their eyes. She wasn't trying to defend herself anymore. She looked like someone finally realizing she had stepped into a home that wasn't hers to enter, and the weight of that realization sat hard on her shoulders. Richard swallowed, voice trembling. Please say something. Tayana rested her hands on the table, her posture calm, controlled. I've said everything I need to say, she replied softly. Now it's time for you to finish telling the truth. He shook his head rapidly, panic rising. I am telling the truth. You haven't started, she said. His chest rose and fell faster. He looked at the mistress as if she might save him. She looked away. And then the collapse began, not with yelling, not with an explosion, but with the slow, undeniable unraveling of a man who had exhausted every lie and had nowhere left to hide. I didn't know how to fix us, he said shakily. Everything felt heavy. I felt like I was failing you. That's not an excuse, she replied. I know, he said, voice cracking. I know it's not. I felt like you were stronger than me. You always have been. And instead of trying to meet you there, I ran somewhere easier. Her eyes held him, not gently, not cruelly, just truthfully. He exhaled sharply, his face collapsing into his hands. I thought I could manage the situation. I thought I could be in control. But I wasn't. I wasn't controlling anything. I was falling apart. The mistress blinked hard, her guilt deepening. You told me you were confused, she whispered. You said you needed time. I lied, he said without looking at her. I told you what made it easier for me to keep you in my life. Those words sliced the air. The mistress's face changed, guilt shifting into something like clarity mixed with humiliation. You used me, she said quietly. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to soften it. He couldn't. I used both of you, he admitted. I didn't want to lose my marriage, but I didn't want to let go of the attention either. There it was. The truth he had been dancing around for months. Tiana didn't blink. She had expected this. She just wanted to hear him finally say it out loud. You didn't cheat because you were lonely, she said softly. You cheated because it was convenient. His face tightened. His eyes filled, but he didn't cry. Not yet. The mistress straightened slightly, her voice trembling but growing in honesty. He told me something else, she said cautiously. Something I don't think he told you. Tiana turned to her, steady. Say it. Richard's eyes shot up, panic flashing. Don't. She cut him off with a whisper. You should have told her yourself. Tiana waited. The mistress took a breath. He told me he wasn't sure he ever wanted to get married. He said he went through with the wedding because he felt trapped by expectations. Richard's head fell into his hands. Tiana inhaled slowly, the air filling her chest like something heavy settling into place. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She didn't break. She simply felt the truth land, not like a surprise, but like a confirmation. He said, the mistress continued, voice shaking, that he loved the idea of you, but didn't know how to be the partner you needed. Richard groaned softly into his palms. I wasn't thinking clearly. You thought clearly enough to say it, Tiana replied. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was steady. That steadiness cut deeper than any anger could. Richard looked at her with pleading eyes. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. You meant it enough to say it to someone else, she replied. Just not to your wife. The mistress looked at the table, ashamed, uncomfortable, realizing she had been carrying truths that shouldn't have belonged to her. Tiana leaned back, not out of shock, but out of realization. This wasn't about another woman, she said quietly. This was about your emotional unfitness. You didn't betray me because you fell in love with someone else. You betrayed me because you never learned how to stand in your own truth. Richard shook his head. I tried. No, she said softly. You tried to avoid discomfort. That's not the same thing. He blinked hard, finally letting a tear fall. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to face yourself, she corrected. He sank deeper into the chair, his composure collapsing fully. The mistress looked from one to the other, finally understanding she had not been part of a romance. She had been part of a distraction, a hiding place, a symptom of a deeper problem. I'm sorry, she whispered to Tiana, tears sliding down her cheeks. I truly am. Tiana nodded. Not in forgiveness, but in acknowledgement. You're not the one who made vows, she said. You're not the one who promised honesty. Her eyes turned back to Richard. You are. Richard's breathing became shallow. His eyes darted to the table, then to the door, then back to Tiana, like a man cornered by a truth he'd run from for years. Tay, he whispered, voice trembling violently. There's something I've never said because I knew it would destroy us. Say it, she said calmly. I don't know if I ever learned how to love. Without fear, he confessed. His voice cracked down the middle. The mistress inhaled sharply. Tayana's expression didn't move. He continued, tears finally breaking free. I wasn't avoiding you. I was avoiding myself. And she, he gestured weakly toward the mistress. She was easy. She didn't require truth from me the way you did. Tayana let the words settle. They didn't crush her. They just completed the picture. He wasn't a man choosing between two women. He was a man who never learned how to choose himself. She exhaled once, slow, final. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? He whispered, lost. For finally telling the truth. It hit him. It hit her. It froze the room. This was the turning point. Not the cheating, not the messages, not the lies. It was the moment Richard admitted, out loud, that he was emotionally unprepared for the marriage he stepped into, and he had hidden that truth from everyone, including himself. The table was silent. 3 plates, untouched. 3 lives reshaped in one night. And no one at that table would ever be the same again. The apartment felt heavier after the dinner, as if the walls themselves were trying to absorb what happened. Even the lights seemed dimmer, softer, like they understood the weight the air carried now. Tayana closed the front door behind the mistress, who left with her head low, her steps slow, her shoulders trembling from the emotional storm she had walked into. Richard remained seated at the table long after the door clicked shut. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared at the empty plate in front of him, looking like a man who had finally run out of places to hide. Tayana didn't sit back down. She didn't want to be near that table anymore. She walked quietly into the living room and stood by the window, the night outside calm and indifferent. There was a street lamp casting a soft glow on the pavement, and in that glow, she felt the contrast between the peaceful world outside and the storm that had just finished tearing through her home. Behind her, Richard slowly stood up. His chair scraped softly against the floor. He didn't come close. He stayed near the table, unsure of how to exist in the same room with her now. Tayana, he whispered. I don't know how to start fixing this. She didn't turn around. She didn't rescue him. She let him sit in the discomfort he created. You don't start with me, she said. You start with yourself. Her voice wasn't cold. It was tired. A kind of tired that didn't come from the day but from carrying emotional weight alone for months. He rubbed the back of his neck anxiously. I want to do better, he said. I want to be better. She closed her eyes briefly. Wanting isn't enough, she replied. He walked closer, stopping a few feet behind her. Can we talk? Please. She turned then, slowly, and when their eyes met, there was no anger in hers, no fire, just a deep well of exhaustion and clarity. What do you want to talk about? She asked softly. He hesitated. Us. There is no us without truth, she said. And right now the truth is still settling. He looked down, shame coating his expression. I'm sorry, he whispered. For everything. She nodded. I know. But forgiveness wasn't in that nod. Understanding wasn't in that nod. It was acknowledgement, nothing more, nothing less. Her chest felt tight, not from rage but from grief, the quiet, heavy grief of watching the version of a life she wanted slip through her fingers. She turned away again, facing the window. She didn't cry. She didn't crumble. She let the night hold space for her. Richard walked to the hallway but didn't continue toward the bedroom. He stopped halfway, uncertain, lost. Do you want me to sleep on the couch? He asked. Yes, she answered without hesitation. He nodded, a defeated small nod, and grabbed a pillow from the bedroom. His footsteps toward the living room couch were slow, almost apologetic. Tayana stayed by the window until she heard him settle onto the cushions. She could feel the distance between them, emotional distance, physical distance, and for the first time, she didn't fight it. She didn't cling to what they used to be. She accepted the reality of what they were now. 2 people who had shared a marriage. 2 people who had shared pain. 2 people who no longer shared a bed. She finally walked into the bedroom alone. The silence inside that room felt different tonight. Not the suspicious silence she'd learned to dread. Not the empty silence of emotional distance. This silence held truth. Raw, undeniable, crushing. She sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers gripping the comforter. A single tear fell, not out of heartbreak but out of release. Grief wasn't a flood tonight. It was a steady drip, She lay down slowly, feeling the cold space beside her where Richard used to sleep. She stared at the ceiling, letting her mind replay bits of the dinner, not to torture herself but because the body tries to make sense of trauma before it lets it go. She heard Richard shift on the couch, as if he couldn't find a comfortable position. She didn't go to him. She didn't soothe him. She didn't pretend. This was the consequence of truth. After a long while, she whispered into the darkness. This didn't break me. It broke what we were. She turned to her side, pulling the blanket around her, and let her eyes close. Sleep didn't come easily, but it came eventually. A fragile, uneasy sleep. And for the first time in their marriage, they slept apart. Not because of anger, not because of punishment, but because rebuilding, whatever that might look like, doesn't happen in one night. It happens after the break. Morning came quietly in their apartment, not with warmth, not with comfort, but with the thin, unfamiliar silence of two people trying to figure out how to stand in the same space after everything has shattered. Tayana woke before the sun fully rose. Not because she slept well, she didn't, but because her body refused to rest any longer. She sat up slowly, feeling the weight of the night on her shoulders. The other side of the bed was untouched, just as she had left it. For a moment she ran her hand across the sheets, not as a gesture of longing but as a recognition of reality. The marriage she built with Richard had been physically, emotionally, spiritually divided last night, and she needed to face what came next. She took a long, steady breath, then stood and walked toward the hallway. The house felt hollow, not abandoned, just paused, like everything inside was waiting for her decision before it dared to move. Richard was sitting on the couch, elbows on his knees, hands intertwined. His head was down, his posture heavy, his eyes red from a night of restless, fractured sleep. When he heard her footsteps, he looked up slowly. "Tayana," he said softly. She didn't speak at first. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and stood by the counter. Her silence wasn't sharp. It was thoughtful, processing, controlled. Richard rose from the couch but stayed a few feet away. "I know you probably don't want to talk yet," he said, "but we need to figure out what happens now." She sipped the water, letting it settle the dryness in her throat before turning to face him. "Yes," she said, "we do." Her tone wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It carried the weight of someone who understood that honesty had to come before decisions. He took a small step closer. "I meant what I said last night. I want to fix this. I want to work on us." She held his gaze, not flinching. "You can want that, Richard. But wanting isn't enough." He looked down, accepting that truth without resistance. They stood like that for a moment, two adults, two hearts exhausted from emotional strain, two spirits trying to gather the courage to face themselves honestly. "Would you consider counseling?" he asked quietly. His voice shook, not from fear of her, but from fear of losing everything. Tayana took a deep breath. "Counseling only works if both people show up completely," she said. "You've never shown up completely. Not with me. Not with yourself." He closed his eyes briefly. "I know, and I'm willing to change that." "Are you willing," she asked carefully, "to sit in a room and talk about the things you've avoided your whole life? Not just the cheating, the emptiness underneath it." Richard blinked, tears gathering. "That's what scares me," he whispered. "But yes," she nodded slowly. "That's the first honest thing you've said in a long time." He swallowed hard, visibly shaken. "But counseling isn't the only option," she continued. He looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Separation," she said plainly. "Taking space, resetting emotionally, figuring out whether this marriage is something we can rebuild or something we need to release." His chest tightened. "Tay," he whispered, voice cracking. "This isn't punishment," she said. "This is clarity. This is me not making the mistake of patching something broken before we understand why it broke." He pressed a hand to his face, trying to steady his breathing. "I don't want to be away from you." She softened, not toward him, but toward the truth she needed to express. "Richard, we've been sharing a home for months without really being together. Physical closeness doesn't fix emotional distance." He looked gutted by the accuracy of her words. "Do you love me?" she asked suddenly, not demanding, not wounded, just seeking truth. Richard's lips parted. "I do," he said. "More than I've shown, more than I've lived. Do you love me enough to rebuild honestly?" She pressed. He hesitated, and that hesitation said everything. Not because he didn't love her, but because he was afraid of the work required to love her the right way. He finally nodded. I want to try. Trying isn't the issue, she said. It's consistency, it's emotional stamina, it's choosing discomfort over shortcuts. You've never done that. He looked away, tears spilling now. You're right, I haven't. She stepped closer, not with affection, but with clarity. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed the man you could have been. He pressed his hands to his eyes, breaking again. But not like at dinner. This time, it wasn't panic. This time, it was acceptance. Tayana, I don't know how to fix the empty parts of me, he said. I've been running from them since I was a kid. I filled the silence with expectations, with image, with people who didn't require honesty. She listened, not interrupting. My family raised me to keep everything surface level, he continued. I learned to pretend I was strong instead of learning how to actually be strong. I don't know how to sit with my emotions. I never have. And that's the problem, she said gently. Not the mistress, not the messages, the emptiness. He nodded weakly. I hurt you because I didn't know how to face myself, he whispered. And you can't be a partner if you've never learned how to be present with yourself, she replied. He broke again, quietly, silently, the kind of breaking that wasn't dramatic but was deeply real. She took a long breath before speaking again. You think this marriage fell apart because you met another woman, she said softly. But that's not the root. That's the symptom. He looked confused. What do you mean? I've been carrying the emotional weight for both of us, she said. I've been keeping the conversations going, keeping the home peaceful, keeping the connection alive, and you started resting on me instead of rising with me. His face shifted, not defensive, not angry, just honest recognition. You got comfortable being half present because I was fully present, she said. And I'm tired, Richard. I'm tired of carrying both roles, he whispered. I didn't realize how much I put on you. That's the point, she said gently. You weren't aware. And I didn't speak up soon enough because I kept hoping you would notice. They stood there in the living room, two people who finally saw the emotional mismatch clearly. Tayana, I grew up learning to hide everything, he said. You grew up learning to face everything. She nodded. And we tried to build a marriage in two different emotional languages. He stepped closer, but not too close. I need to learn your language, he whispered. And I can't teach you mine, she said. You have to learn it for yourself. He inhaled shakily. So what now? We choose, she replied. Not out of fear, not out of guilt, out of clarity. And in that moment, they both understood. They were not choosing the marriage, not yet. They were choosing the next step, the real one, the hard one, the honest one. The day after their conversation unfolded slowly, as if time itself was cautious of moving too fast. Nothing in the apartment changed physically. The same furniture, the same walls, the same sunlight passing through the curtains, but everything inside the space felt different. Not fragile, not shattered, just exposed, like a wound finally getting air. Tayana stood in the kitchen early that afternoon, her fingers lightly touching the rim of a mug she wasn't drinking from. She wasn't lost in thought, she was deep in it. The kind of thinking that requires honesty, not fear. The kind that forces a person to sit with every version of themselves. The one who loved, the one who hurt, the one who needed healing, and the one who was ready to grow. Behind her, Richard lingered in the living room. He watched her in quiet intervals, unsure of when or if he should speak. Every gesture he made was cautious, not out of fear of her anger, but fear of tipping the balance before they understood what balance even meant. They were two people who shared a space, shared history, shared pain, but not yet a shared direction. Not today, not yet. They needed clarity before they needed answers. Tayana, Richard said quietly from the doorway. She didn't turn fully, but she acknowledged him with a soft hum. It wasn't distance, it was space. Intentional space. Healthy space. We never finished talking last night, he said. I know, she replied. We needed time. He stepped closer, but still gave her enough distance to breathe. Are you ready to talk now? He asked. She set the mug down gently. Yes. But understand something, Richard. This isn't a talk about saving us. This is a talk about understanding what's left of us. He nodded slowly, bracing himself. Okay, he said. I'm here. She gestured toward the couch. Sit with me. They sat together but not touching. A separation that wasn't cold, simply honest. she began. We're standing at a crossroads, Tayana said. Not because of the dinner, not because of her, but because your actions forced this marriage into a truth we can't unsee. He swallowed hard. I know. Do you? She asked gently. Because this isn't just about cheating. It's about emotional absence. It's about me fighting for a marriage I didn't realize I was fighting alone. He lowered his head. She continued, her tone steady, not sharp. Before we decide anything, we need to ask the real questions, not the easy ones. Richard met her eyes. Ask me anything. She inhaled slowly. Do you want a marriage? She asked. Or do you want a relationship that doesn't require emotional labor? His breath caught. I want a marriage. I want our marriage. She shook her head gently. That's not an answer. That's a hope. I'm asking if you're ready to do the uncomfortable work, the emotional work, not just the apologetic work. He paused. And for once, he didn't rush the answer. Yes, he said, after a long moment. I am. I don't know how to yet, but I'm willing to learn. She studied him carefully, not looking for perfection but sincerity, and she saw sincerity, even if it was wrapped in uncertainty. My turn, she said softly. I need to be honest too. He straightened, anxious but attentive. I love you, she said, but love is not enough. Not for me, not anymore. I need consistency, I need honesty, and I need a partner who meets me emotionally. I can't carry both sides of the relationship. That's fair, he whispered. And I'm tired, she continued. Tired of pretending everything was fine. Tired of fighting for moments that should have been natural. Tired of hoping you'd notice the cracks before they became fractures. He blinked rapidly, absorbing every word. That's what the dinner was about, she said. Not revenge, not humiliation. It was the only way to force truth into the open. He nodded slowly. I understand that now. I know I broke something in us, he admitted, but I also broke something in myself. I didn't know how to show up fully because no one ever taught me what full presence looks like. I thought being loyal most of the time was enough. I didn't understand that marriage requires depth, not just duty. She listened, giving him space to speak. I never cheated because I stopped loving you, he said. I cheated because I didn't know how to face the parts of me that felt small next to your strength. That's not my burden to carry, she replied quietly. He nodded. I know, and I'm not asking you to carry it anymore. So, she said, what do you choose? He took a deep breath. I choose to rebuild, with counseling, with accountability, with honesty. Even if it means starting from the ground up. She nodded. I respect that. He hesitated. What about you? He asked softly. Her answer didn't come immediately. She needed time, not to think, but to let the truth settle. I choose myself first, she said finally. And if choosing myself allows you and I to rebuild something healthy together, then we'll rebuild, slowly, with boundaries. With truth, he exhaled, a mixture of relief and fear. And if it doesn't? He asked. Then we'll walk away with dignity, she answered. Not as enemies, not out of bitterness, but because we finally learned how to be honest about what we can and can't give each other. He nodded, accepting that his future with her wasn't guaranteed. Not lost, just not guaranteed. And that was honesty. Tayana leaned back, letting her body soften for the first time in days. We're not making promises today, she said. We're making commitments. Promises fade. Commitments require action. He listened as if each word was instruction for a life he had never been taught to live. You'll go to counseling, she said. Individually first. You'll learn your emotional language before you try to learn mine. He nodded. I'll take space, she added. Not distance, space. Enough to breathe, enough to rest, enough to stop reacting to pain and start responding to clarity. His voice cracked. I'll respect whatever you need. I know, she said softly, because for the first time, you mean it. She stood slowly, walking to the dining table where everything began. Her fingers lightly touched the edge of the third plate, still untouched from last night, still angled, still symbolic. This, she said quietly, was the moment everything cracked. Richard stepped beside her, his voice low. And this can be the moment everything changes. She turned to him. I set this table to reveal the truth, she said. But now I need to set new boundaries to protect my healing. I understand, he replied. They lifted the plates together, not as a couple restored, but as two people beginning the long walk toward honesty. She looked at him, the man who hurt her, the man who loved her imperfectly, the man who was finally ready to face his own reflection without running. "I don't hate you," she said. His eyes filled. "I don't know where we end up," she added, "but wherever that is, it will be honest, and that's already better than where we were." He nodded, unable to speak. "And remember this," she said softly. "You cannot love someone fully if you're afraid to face yourself." Her words weren't blame. They were truth. And truth was the thread that would decide everything moving forward. They weren't magically healed. They weren't instantly united. They weren't suddenly perfect. They were two people standing at the edge of transformation. Richard would begin his emotional work, not for her, but for himself. Tayana would begin her healing, not to hold the marriage together, but to repair the parts of her heart that had been stretched thin. And together, they would walk into whatever came next with clarity instead of confusion. Some stories end with reunion. Some end with separation. Some end with something more honest than either: growth. This story chooses growth. Growth as individuals. Growth as partners. Growth as two human beings learning to let truth lead rather than fear. If this story touched a part of you, share it with someone who may need the reminder that love and truth must walk together.